headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Let's go straight to my next guest. That's human rights activist and director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation. It is Peter Tatchell himself. Good afternoon, Peter.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. You've written a powerful piece in the Mail today criticising the Stop the War coalition, specifically some of its luminaries like Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott, for essentially acting as if they're Putin's idiots, for blaming this entire dispute, this conflict in Ukraine, on NATO expansionism. You're suggesting, and I have a lot of sympathy with what you're saying, that these people are driven by a kind of rampant anti-Americanism that has blinded them to the truth of what's happening in Ukraine. They've been invaded by a fascist state run by a fascist, and you know, because you've been to Russia many times and suffered many pains and agonies at the hands of Putin's goons. Your thoughts?
Well, first let me say I was a long-time supporter of Stop the War coalition. They did great work opposing the Iraq war. They were inspirational. They were proven right. But in recent years, they've really lost the plot. I mean, they claim to be anti-war, but they never did anything when Russia intervened in Georgia in 2008, when it annexed Crimea in 2014, and since its non-stop bombing campaign in Syria from 2015 onwards. They now claim that they're against the Russians, that they've always opposed the Russians. That is nonsense. They never organized a single protest when Russian warplanes were pulverizing Syrian cities like Aleppo to rubble. And I think it's really, really appalling that a principled anti-war movement can have such incredible double standards. I think they've proved that they're a movement without principles. They once had them, but they've lost them.
Yes, you called their tendency to blame the West. They talk of NATO's nuclear warmongering, its interventionist agenda, and they even claimed that Britain and America were ramping up the threat of war. And you called that arrant nonsense and Alice in Wonderland delusion. Do you think that, I know Jeremy Corbyn's not representative of everyone in the Stop the War coalition, but do you think that Jeremy Corbyn, Diane Abbott, to a slight extent also John McDonnell, the usual suspects, have they been unable to divest themselves of the illusion that Russia is still somehow some kind of communist paradise?
I think there's that hankering for the old Soviet Union, which many of them supported or had time for. I think there's also, as you say, it's driven by very much an opposition to American imperialism. And of course, I have opposed American imperialism. What they did in Vietnam was appalling. What they did in Iraq, the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of civilians who died during the Iraq war, that was a war crime. Very similar to what the Russians are doing in Ukraine today. I want to just correct you. John McDonnell should not be on your list.
Yeah, well, I did actually qualify. He's not quite as bad as
he from the outset, John McDonnell has been absolutely steadfast against Russian aggression and imperialism. He's been supporting the protests long before the Russian invasion. So John McDonnell has been on the right side, as have many other people on the left. One of the reasons why the Stop War Coalition has belatedly come out against Russian aggression in Ukraine is because they've had a huge backlash on people in the anti-war movement and on the left. But I've also got to say, to be fair, there's a lot of hypocrisy here. We are rightly outraged at what Russia is doing in Ukraine, yet we are actually helping to arm Saudi Arabia, who's doing the exact same thing in Yemen, killing tens of thousands of civilians. So there's got to be a consistency, and we don't see it from sections of the left or sections from the right. Boris Johnson is going to Saudi Arabia tomorrow, I think.
Yes, he is. I was going to ask you. I've got it written down. I've got it written down. I'll ask Peter Tatchell about Saudi Arabia. So he's going over there supposedly to make a deal with Saudi Arabia to help ease the UK's reliance on Russian gas and oil. I mean, should he be cohorting with Saudi Arabians in this respect?
Well, if Boris Johnson thinks what Russia is doing in Ukraine is wrong, Saudi Arabia is doing pretty much the same thing in Yemen. We should have no business with them whatsoever. They should be treated as a pariah state, just like Putin's Russia.
Indeed. On the Ukrainian issue, Peter, I mean, obviously what we're seeing happening in Ukraine is a massive human catastrophe. You know, thousands and thousands of innocent civilians are being killed out there. And what we would all like, including the people from Stop the War, would be a negotiated settlement. Do you see any chance of that as things stand right now?
Well, of course, a negotiated settlement, peace talks, is the number one preference. But right now, Vladimir Putin's terms of negotiation is Ukraine's surrender and incorporation into his plan for a greater Russia. So I cannot see it happening. What also makes me angry is not only have Stop the War belatedly come to the table to oppose Russian aggression, they are opposing arms being sent to Ukraine. So anti-tank weapons, anti-aircraft missiles, these are purely defensive weapons. And by saying that they oppose these Western weapons being sent to Ukraine, they're effectively saying they want the Ukrainians to be left defenseless. And worse than that, they've even now condemned sanctions against Russia. So a non-violent, peaceful economic leverage against Russia, they also think that's wrong. I mean, I just think it's unbelievable, and it's just monstrous that an anti-war movement, led in many cases by socialists, should be taking this point of view. They are lining up with Russia and the others who want to hold back the right of the Ukrainian people to defend themselves and to have their own self-determination.
Peter, as we celebrated on my show not so long ago, you're now over 70. Makes me feel old, let alone you. You've been around, globally speaking. Where do you think this is heading, Ukraine, Russia? Where are we heading?
Well, the writing was on the wall about 30 years ago. Myself and others warned that Russia was shifting its weapon systems away from purely defensive weapons to increasingly long-range offensive weapons, like missiles, tanks, armored vehicles, long-range warships and submarines. A peaceful nation does not require long-range offensive weapons on the scale that Russia has developed them over the last 30 years. And China is doing exactly the same today. It is a very big worry about the way in which China is switching its defense procurement and military configurations from a defensive capability to an offensive one. I'm so angry with successive British governments, both Labour and Conservative, that they turned their eyes away from this reality.
So we're running out of time now, but you fear we could be in for a long-term problem here?
Well, absolutely. Clearly, the Ukrainians are not going to roll over and surrender. They're going to fight. And I fear this war will go on for many months, even years. And I also fear that, NATO did not threaten nuclear war. President Putin did by implication, saying that if people tried to stop him, the world would be faced with weapons unimaginable. A clear insinuation that he might use chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons.
Absolutely.
That is the real fear. And we've got to find a way of de-escalating this conflict. But I'm afraid that right now, the Russians are not into serious negotiations. And we have to support the Ukraine people. They deserve our support, just like we deserved it during the Second World War when we faced the Nazis. And I've got to say, if Stop the War's logic today applied back in the Second World War, they would have opposed Western aid to the anti-Nazi resistance in occupied Europe on the grounds that would inflame tensions and show a lack of concern for Hitler's worries. I mean, it's just absolutely shocking. Yeah. And I'm so glad I got a chance to say my piece.
Well, I'm glad you said it here on Talk Radio. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Peter. Thank you very much.